Welcome to the week ahead. I'm Hafiz Mazuki and with me is Ibrahim Sani. And if you're watching this show for the past few weeks, you might have noticed something is slightly different this time around. I'm here, as you can see, in the studio of AWANI, while Ibrahim is back home. Ibrahim, how has the past week been for you?
Well, it's been quite interesting because the idea here has always been about working from home and making things a little bit more productive. But the issue is also trying to navigate the whole problems of the technical difficulties, recording on webcam, recording on pure camera like this, and trying to work things out at the end. And it's going to be a hassle, but this is how it is, right? We have to work from home from now on.
Yes. To me, actually, you look great, actually. Your camera looks great, your background looks great. Anyways, as you know, it's been a tough 2021. In fact, some may say that it is actually even tougher than 2020. And we are at the end of the first month of 2021. And looking ahead to next week, we are expecting, of course, the end of MCO, which is scheduled on February 4th. Of course, when we talk about the ending of MCO, there are a number of issues being talked about. Of course, the main primary issues concerning health and also economy. But Ibrahim, what do you think is the main crux of the issue heading into next week, which is expected to be the end of MCO, especially looking at, if you remember, the number of cases recorded in Friday was enormous. What do you think of that?
Yeah, actually two things, Hafiz, that happened on Friday a few days ago. The first is, of course, the finance minister saying that there will not be a full total economic shutdown, and of course the numbers encroaching 6,000 cases. The first, of course, is why Tengku Zafrul said that, the finance minister said that, is because he's trying to dispel that whole debacle that happened between the Association of European Businesses here in Malaysia with their meeting with MITI. A letter was circulated talking about a possibility of a total shutdown. Of course, both bodies, i.e. the MITI as well as this European Chamber of Commerce, clarified. But the story is that the investor confidence is being taken a hit, and because of that, the Minister of Finance is now saying things like, relax, there wouldn't be a total economic shutdown. But the real story is this: with numbers encroaching 6,000 cases per day, will the government end MCO as promised on the 4th of February? Now, in this week ahead, we have to rely on two things. The first is, of course, the creation of, or the resumption of the MCO, or the second, whether or not it will be a targeted MCO for certain areas, and then other areas will be a conditional MCO. I don't see it happening, because if you look at the numbers, the data coming in from Selangor as well as Wilayah Persekutuan is really high. We're talking, 40% of active cases is in KL and Selangor. So how will the MCO be done partially if this is not done properly across statewide?
But actually, Ibrahim, if we were to look at how some of the other countries are implementing their versions of MCO or their lockdowns, so we can look at certain countries like New Zealand, who has different strata or different tier. I mean, we are expecting, of course, almost 1 year into the pandemic, the government should be talking about implementing tiers, don't you think? But we are still in the midst of these alphabet soups, which pretty much confuse a lot of people. How do we progress from this, do you think?
No, you're right. But if you look at the data per se, the pandemic, yes, of course, it's been around for 1 year, but the numbers were fairly controlled right up until the Sabah elections. After the Sabah state elections, it's these numbers that became uncontrollable. But remember this, Hafiz, if you think that the numbers today are uncontrollable, it can become very much more chaotic if things go out of control. I mean, we're talking 50,000 new cases a day is a possibility if there's no form of MCO is being put in place. But you see, it's always been about the direct correlation between economic growth and public health care. Late last week, I was driving around my neighborhood at night because for some reason, both Food Panda and Grab couldn't deliver to my area. I don't know why, but that would resulted in me driving out to my local area here in Kota Damansara and started to look for restaurants that are open at 8 p.m. Yeah, it's slightly late when it comes to MCO, but it was scary, Hafiz. It was empty. It was dark. It was dark, and I'm talking, Dataran Sunway. I'm talking, a place where
Basically a hive of activity. What used to be a hive of activity.
It's dark. It's near empty, and it's just 8 p.m. So if we can extrapolate my experience here in Sunway, Dataran Sunway, where that shopping mall is there, Sunway Nexus, as well as Angkor Mall is. If it's the same there as well as across the state in Selangor at least, we're talking a situation where a prolonged economic non-growth is going to happen, and this will impact the future livelihood of Malaysians, which will in turn impact how the pandemic is being controlled. So circling back into all this, yes, I have to agree with you. We have to look at models like in New Zealand or in other places to look at tiered MCO being put in place, but has to be very careful in terms of how we do this.
The direct benefactors, of course, Ibrahim, when we talk about the economy, is definitely the companies, the SMEs, etc., etc. And I want to pivot our conversation from talking about the end of MCO, and now we want to talk about the impact it has on companies, or how it has been for the past year for certain companies. And I'm sure, in fact, I believe in the week ahead, we have a lot of these reports that is expected to be announced by big companies, including Bursa Malaysia next week. How do we make of this, Ibrahim? Because if we were to look at the report announced by DG this past week, yes, they did well, but of course the revenue dipped compared to the year before, and we are all expecting this. But help us unpack it even more.
Yeah, you're right.
What
because
can we
last
expect
week
this
we're
week?
talking about DG.com and whether or not this is an indicator of how corporate earnings will look like for 2020. DG last week reported revenue declined by 2.7%. We're looking at net profit down 14.8%, and this is a telco sector, a sector that all of us use. Even right now, as we record this interview, we're using the telco sector. Think about it that way. And of course, when we look at what is going to happen with some of the corporates in Malaysia, it's going to be a big ask to see them post profits for 2020, except of course with the exclusion of some sectors like rubber glove. But not many people are talking about Bursa Malaysia as a Berhad company, as a public listed company. We've seen how this past week GameStop was a big deal. People talk about how retail investors are flocking the market and trying to outdo the hedge funds in the US. And because of this, they are entering the market, buying stocks, in fact selling them as well. Whatever it is, it was a vibrant equity market that happened in the US for the past week, but that's not been the case just for the past week. It's been going on for some time, for the past few weeks. I can say the same about Malaysia when retail investors are flocking the market ever since the first MCO was introduced in March. If you think about it, the opening CDS account has been on record high for the past year. In 2020, Bursa Malaysia have announced that people opening up trading shares account has been on the rise. And because of this, logic dictates that a lot more retail investors are coming into the market, and because of this, they might be a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more active on the stock exchange as well. Now, how will this translate to, say, for instance, Bursa as public entities' profits? I don't know yet. We have to see. But my suspicion is that Bursa will post better than expected profits as earlier discussed, just like how we've seen with the rubber gloves sector. Now, of course, when we talk about the rubber glove sector versus all the other sectors, rubber gloves has seen astronomical profits. Debates whether or not a windfall tax should be imposed on that industry, but that has not happened. In fact, during the budget presentation last year, we've seen how only about 400 million is going to be taxed upon, in a way, to the rubber glove sector. But Bursa itself as a company might be able to post profits. Now, this is indicative of the Malaysian public or retail investors getting a little bit more interested investing in shares for this year. So this is one company outside of that rubber glove industry that might be able to post profits better than thought.
But here, this is what is interesting for me, and of course, I'm not a financial guy. I'm not looking at stocks, etc., or economic reports by these companies. But looking at it overall, when we see that big companies posted profits, of course, it is expected. But when they post a slip in revenue, and we're talking about I would say a big percentage points of reduction. What does this mean for the smaller companies, Ibrahim?
It means that they don't have the necessary funds to grow their company. That's all there is to it. Small businesses need retail customers, and small businesses also need retail investors. Right now, both are missing from their business ecosystem. And because of this, we're going to see a whole lot more small businesses closing up shops, more than what we've already seen this entire year. And this is a very scary thought, because if you think about it, data from MITI has shown that SME sector employs up to 95% of the total workforce in Malaysia. And if small businesses close shop, that means more than 95% of employees in Malaysia is going to be at risk from not being employed, at least starting this year. And this is important for us to underline. You have to expect, and we're going to be talking about it later, I suppose, the next week, Department of Statistics is going to announce the labor statistics for last year, and that's going to take place on February 4th. It's not just about the unemployment figure that we have to be looking at. We also have to be looking at underemployment. So this conversation of us talking about small companies running out of business is going to be directly correlated with the number of unemployment and number of underemployment, which I expect is going to rise because of the bad situation that we're in right now.
Yes, definitely. We're going to be speaking more about it. Please stay tuned to the week ahead. We'll take a short break. Welcome back to the week ahead. I am Hafiz Marzuki here in the AWANI studio, and at home, working from home is our dear...
I have with me myself, Ibrahim Sani, doing this from my room.
Yes, exactly. So as Ibrahim, I would like to continue our conversation before the break, where we spoke about the labor force statistics, which is expected to be announced next week or the week ahead. So what can we expect from this report? What are you looking at?
Well, I'm looking at the number of unemployed increase, the rate of unemployment. Because if you look at the research reports, you have to look at it from 2 points of view. The first is a snapshot, like a picture, where things stand as at, say, 31st of December. But number two, you also have to look at it in a dynamic fashion, where the rate of increase or the rate of decrease is steep or not steep. And if the rate of unemployment is rising very fast, month on month, meaning that the number of people unemployed in December is far, far higher than number of unemployment in November, then we're going to see a little bit more troubling argument into how 2020 will shape up. That's the first thing I'm going to look at, the rate of unemployment. The second thing that I want to look at is, of course, the concept of underemployment, which is quite difficult to quantify, because underemployment, as you know, Hafiz, is being measured through subjective means. If you have a job but you're getting paid half the rate, or if you have a job and your salary is not being paid on time, normally you would get your salary on the 30th every month, or 25th, or 1st of every month, but this time round you're getting your salary paid late, or you're getting your salary paid in full, but your EPF contribution is not being paid. That kind of problems in terms of wages, and then it's going to create a big story of how 2021 will shape up. Because just before we went into the break, we were talking about how small business is going to be negatively or adversely impacted by the continuation of the COVID. We're also going to be looking directly into how the unemployment rate is going to rise. I don't believe that the unemployment rate is going to go down. If the DOSM figures are coming out, or the Department of Statistics says that unemployment rate has gone down month on month and year on year, I think I have to question on how they use the mechanism being involved, because just by doing a random, survey across our circle of friends, we're seeing so much of our friends losing jobs. And if our friends are losing jobs, and the official figure by DOSM says that the employment rate is okay and everything, then either I'm living in a different reality than DOSM is, or there's some problems into how they capture unemployment rate.
But that's the thing, Ibrahim. I will touch a bit on underemployment. But when we're talking about unemployment, it seems to indicate the health of the country's economy, etc., etc. Of course, when we are facing a big challenge such as the pandemic, it is important somehow for the statistics to reflect at least a sense of moving in the right direction. So are we expecting, I would say, somehow improving number in terms of the unemployment statistic?
It's difficult to say right now, because remember, all these reports come first before the GDP numbers, and the GDP figures is going to be expected to be announced in February or March. And this is just one of the many that will be coming up first, right? Unemployment, trade, we're looking at FDIs, those kind of reports come first before the GDP. But every one of them is a leading indicator into how the GDP will look like. What is interesting for me, Hafiz, is this. The finance minister says that he is holding on to his view that the GDP figure for Malaysia for 2021 will continue to be retained at a forecasted rate of positive 7%. Positive 7% from a negative 5% or negative 7 or negative 8%. We're looking at a growth of 14 points. You get me? I mean, if you are negative 7 and you sit last year and you want to be, and you're saying that it's going to be positive 7 this year, we're looking at a claw rate of 14 points, right, across the board. That is possible if we were living in the roaring 90s, where Malaysia was deemed as the tiger economy and everything was great. We could literally see buildings popping up, KL Tower, KLCC, those kind of stuff, KLIA. Yeah, I mean, I would understand if our economy was growing at double digits then. But to see our number growing from negative 7 to 7 or negative 5 to 7, we're looking at 10, 20, 14% claw rate. It's going to be very hard for us to justify. Now, it's very difficult to also question the official figures coming in from the government, because we don't have the kind of data that they do, right? We can only speculate.
And it is their job to kind of pump up the optimism, right?
Yeah, I mean, hang on. Pumping up optimism isn't their job, right? Department of Statistics is supposed to give us the raw data. We, people like you and me, are supposed to discuss and see whether or not it is optimistic and whether or not we need to pump it up. That's our job. Just like our job is not trying to go around town doing census, asking people how many people in their household. That's not our job, that's Dawson's job. Dawson's job is supposed to give us the raw data, black and white, and let other people interpret and not let other people debate about it. So that's my question right now. Is Dawson's data reliable? Is it logical? Is it possible for us to accept the data to be, to be trustworthy? I'm not trying to throw Dawson under the bus here. I'm just saying that the need for Dawson to provide good, reliable, and trustworthy primary data has to be continued right here. And it starts with numbers like unemployment figures. It starts with numbers like trade and FDI. It starts with all of those figures.
Okay. Before we talk about trade and FDI, I'm going to touch a bit on underemployment, and I want to pick your brain here. How should the government approach the issue of underemployment? Because of course, right now, the main concern is of course jobs, and people losing jobs. But when we discuss about underemployment, is basically people having jobs but not to the best of their quality. And how should we look at this issue?
We look at what the government has done, right? Since taking over in February last year, the government has introduced a number of stimulus programs. Some of them are called stimulus because they are indeed injecting new money into the economy. Some of them are called stimulus despite the fact that no new money is coming into the economy, and it's a rebrand or reallocation of existing resources from somewhere else into these efforts of getting people back on their feet. Whatever it is, the government has done a lot to get people back on their feet. But all of this is worthless if the pandemic continues to rage on. So the issue here isn't about solving that vicious cycle of getting people on their feet by getting the economy opening and by getting people stimulus programs into their hands, or other methods like getting access to your EPF savings and all that. It's not that. That's not how you break this cycle. How you break this cycle is definitely how you bring back the economy through a non-pandemic means, i.e. through vaccine. Now, we've seen how the Minister of MOSTI, or the Science and Technology Minister, Kari Jamaluddin, KJ, has been focusing extremely hard in putting vaccines into our shoulders as soon as possible. But despite his best efforts, we've seen how the process is long and arduous, and it's very difficult for him to get the necessary approvals from the relevant authorities, from KKM, from our version of the FDA and so on. So it takes a long time, and nobody is dragging their feet in getting the vaccines up and running. But let's assume that even at optimal levels, it's not going to get into the market in the nearest future. We're looking at a data that was published by the EIU, or the Economic Intelligence Unit, that argues that 60% of Malaysians will achieve herd immunity only by mid-2022. That's about 15 months away. Yeah, 15 months away, 16 months away, 18 months away. So there is no better way to say this than to say it, as it is. For the next 18 months, Malaysia is not going to be in a good shape. Small businesses are going to close shop. People are going to lose jobs. It's very hard for people to make money because, well, there is an MCO going on in one shape or another. See MCO, enhanced MCO, targeted MCO, no MCO, full MCO. Whatever it is, it's not going to be business as usual. And it's not going to be business as usual for the next 15 to 18 months. Until then, we just have to hunker down and prepare for the worst, because the worst is indeed coming.
Oh, that's a grim outlook you painted there, Ibrahim. But
it's a grim, but the best way to handle a reality is to face it head on, right? That's the best way.
Yes. I mean, you have to be realist, not an optimist or pessimist, but you have to be a realist. And touching on the last topic before we close the show, this week is, of course, the External Trade Index announcement, which is also expected in the week ahead. How do you see this panning out, Ibrahim?
Okay, so what we're looking at right now is the external trade announcement that is going to be expected to be announced on February 8. So we are jumping one day ahead of the week ahead. So in the next 8 days, we are going to be looking at external trade figures, and this is going to confirm or deny some of the allegations made by politicians, both on the opposition side as well as the government side. Very recently, leader of opposition, Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim, was on the media, was actually on Astro AWANI even, talking about or questioning the numbers that is being presented by the Ministry of Finance, saying that Malaysia's FDI has been in a terrible shape for years, and much more so last year than compared to other years. That's his argument. On the opposite side, we've seen how Tengku Zafrul has been saying time and again that the FDI in Malaysia, even though it is in a downtrend for the longest of time, it is actually better than most of our peers. Now that's beside the point, because when we look at FDI, for instance, foreign direct investments, investors come into the country not based on sentiment, not whether they like Malaysia because our people are nice or friendly, or they like Malaysia because of our weather and fine food. No. They're here to make money.
They're not choosing a tourist destination.
No, not when it comes to FDI lah. Maybe yes. When the pandemic is over, they want to come to Langkawi or whatever, Pangko. Please, by all means, we are more than happy to receive them. But when we talk about FDI, they want to make money. They put money into our place, and if it stops making money for them, they take it out. It's a very unemotional event, to be frank. So the question now is, do we, number one, need foreign money? Number two, how do we retain this foreign money if we really want it? Because I think foreign direct investments are still good to be had in Malaysia, particularly when we look at things like exchange rates, interest rate near zero, both in Malaysia as well as everywhere around the world. So it's about time for them to put their money and park their money for the long run and invest in Malaysian companies, and of course in Malaysian industries as well. But that may no longer be the case if Malaysian businesses can no longer provide the kind of returns that they can get from And when you look at other places like Indonesia, like Vietnam, these two places are rising stars. In fact, they are, in the case of Vietnam, they are already a proven star, a proven Lionel Messi, a proven Cristiano Ronaldo when it comes to foreign investments. And because of that, because of the low base structure, everything in Vietnam is cheap. And then when you build something in Vietnam, you pump money inside Vietnam in US dollars, and you pump it small. You get a lot of resources from the capital that you put in, and then when you transfer back to the first world countries, you're going to get a lot more in return. So because of that, we're seeing a greater interest of foreign money coming into Vietnam as well as Indonesia. When it comes to Malaysia, we are stuck between two worlds. We are no longer cheap when it comes to labor base and labor manufacturing and all that other stuff. We're but we're not really high manufacturing country like or high services country like in Singapore. And because of this, we really have to ask ourselves, do some soul searching, whether or not we want to be a cheap factory like Indonesia or Vietnam, or an expensive service-based, client-based country like Singapore. Until and unless we solve that, I think FDI is going to be tough for us coming into the market.
I guess, I mean, the question will always remain, and what better time than to rethink about how we look at things, at economy, at trade, investment, FDIs, etc., than this time when we're facing such a big challenge. As always, Ibrahim, thank you for speaking. It's always a pleasure talking to you. I guess that's it for this edition of Week Ahead. Stay tuned to next week. I'm Hafiz Mazuki, and with me, Ibrahim Sani, signing off for this episode.